Welcome back to the John Fredericks Show. Time now is 7:07. On the line with us, Erik Prince. Erik Prince, former CEO of Blackwater. Erik is considering a proposal for the Afghanistan war, which the administration is looking at. You're on with Colonel Mike and Dr. Michael Scheuer. Erik, welcome to the John Fredericks Show.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning, Erik.
Good morning.
Erik, tell us a little bit about your proposal.
Well, here's the thing. Whether you're left, right, or center, I think we could all agree it would be good to bring the Afghan war to an end. It's our longest war in American history, 16 years, more than 20,000 wounded, 2,400 American dead, and we're spending, as a country, we've spent approaching $1 trillion, capital T trillion, and we're still spending more than the entire UK defense budget just in Afghanistan at $50 billion next year. And as Secretary Mattis said in testimony, we are not winning. So the current DoD very conventional strategy is not having the desired results against the Taliban and the other 20-some terrorist organizations resident in Afghanistan. So I took a step back and said, how do we rationalize this and don't waste so much money and have something actually effective on the ground? There's 9,000 U.S. troops there now, 4,000 NATO, and 26,000 contractors.
Boy, I never knew that number. 26,000 private contractors already.
Yes. 9,500 of those are Americans, and the rest would be from elsewhere around the world. So people wrongly mischaracterize this as some expansion of contractors. No, this would be a contraction of everything. And to kind of start with a clean sheet of paper, what are the three things the Afghan forces need to survive? One, they need direct support from the bottom up. So the U.S. military is there, and they don't really do any mentoring below the brigade or even corps level. Okay, so the units where they're actually engaging the enemy are not getting that kind of direct mentoring. So I would put in significant professional, long-term contracted mentors that live with, train with, patrol with, and when necessary, fight side by side with their Afghan counterparts. And if they provide them leadership, intelligence, communications, medical, and logistics expertise in the field, they kind of serve as a structural support on which the Afghan unit can build upon.
Erik, what is the estimated proposal of the government now? How much is it expected to spend in 2017?
The U.S. is going to spend north of $50 billion there.
Wow. And what is your plan cost how much?
It costs less than 8% of that.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, it seems to me, Mr. Prince, that the fundamental problem in Afghanistan is tribalism. You're never going to have a national army in the sense that it's not going to go to areas where its soldiers are part of a tribe and kill other members of that tribe. It's the social system of Afghanistan that is the problem. In now 3,000 years of history, the only thing that has ever succeeded for a period of time, and granted, it's never been for very long, maybe 10 or 12, 15 years, is a punitive expedition that knocked the devil out of whatever they could find to knock the devil out of, and then got out. Just the fact that people would still be fighting with foreigners against their own people, I think argues against ever having any kind of national force that is more than the name national force. That's just my opinion. I've looked at it. I've worked on the issue since 1986 through 2004, on and off, most of the time full time. And the big problem is the presence of foreigners. And how many times have we seen American soldiers killed by people who are in the Afghan army? Wouldn't they do the same thing to contractors if the mood struck them?
Well, a couple things. The one part of the Afghan forces that actually function really well is the Afghan commandos, the special forces, because they are mentored on a direct in-the-field basis, like I'm recommending doing for the rest of the Afghan army. The Afghan commandos are about 17,000 personnel, and they come from all over the place, from all the tribes. They are Pashtuns, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Halilis. They're from all over. But they know that if they have people there that will make sure they're paid on time, fed on time, and be with them, it works. Second,
why are they losing then, sir?
Well, because the rest of the Afghan army is built in the mirror image of the U.S. Army, built to fight a very conventional fight.
Yeah. Well, I don't doubt that
for
that's
example,
true.
we went from a huge amount of air support provided by the coalition to effectively no air support, and so it's allowed the Taliban to go back to very ancient siege tactics, where 300 or 400 Taliban can surround an Afghan base, mine the roads, block it from any resupply, and without any kind of air, that poor base commander ends up surrendering after a week or two of fighting. And so if you just do, my recommendation is to do mentoring across the Afghan army in a proven way, like the Afghan Special Forces have, give them some air support so that they get surveillance and close air support, medevac, and mobility. And the third is just some governance support to help them with medical care, combat medical medicine support, and to make sure when those battalions call for resupply, they get the food, fuel, parts, and ammunition they need. If you do those three things well for the Afghan forces, it will work way better than what we have now. And that's going to at least provide enough pressure on the Taliban and the rest of these guys. Look, because the ultimate solution for Afghanistan is a political settlement. But the the Taliban feel like they're winning right now. In fact, the Taliban came out against my recommendation publicly last week, indicating that they even prefer the status quo because they're winning. So the current policy of the U.S. military has to change.
Erik, would this involve Chinese contractors too?
No. No.
Mostly U.S. contractors?
It would be the mentors would come from I would call it the NATO soft veteran community. Mm-hmm. The same kind of proven performance, high capability guys that have been there before and want to and are willing to go back.
How much has the U.S. obligated so far for the Afghan war since 2001 or 2?
We're approaching $1 trillion, and the other sad thing is that there's another $1 trillion of veterans' health care costs that we haven't even experienced yet.
Yes.
Peak health care costs for all the World War II veterans wasn't experienced until the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that the U.S. taxpayers, in addition to the veterans, will be paying for the next 40 years as well.
And they don't even have the budget or the money set aside, as always.
Nope, that's correct. So look, I tried to rationalize. Look, because there's three arguments. I think you can pull out completely of Afghanistan, and there's a lot of people have that feeling, and I can see where they're coming from because it has been such a mess. But I don't want to see the ISIS or Taliban battle flag flying over the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, which is exactly what would happen in 6 months or a year if we did that. But we can't keep doing the same ineffective policy we have been. So I tried to come up with a very scaled down but very effective, much cheaper way to do this that changes the model. You mentioned also before the issue of blue on blue or green on blue, where some local insider attacks. The other nature of how you could deploy contractors is they're going to stay there for years. That guy would go in for 90 days, come home for 30, back in for 90, home for 30, but he's going to go back to the same battalion, in the same valley, in the same villages area for years. Versus when a U.S. soldier deploys there, they go for 6 or 9 months, and they're there, and then they leave. And all that local knowledge leaves with them, and the Afghans lose touch with them. So the Afghan soldiers that are there don't build that relationship with the U.S. guys because it's all very, very short term. If the Afghans know this guy is coming back, continue to work alongside of them, it's different. And even the whole method of way the Afghans would attach to, the way the mentors would attach to the Afghan forces, in the same way the aircraft would be attached to the Afghan forces. By the UN definition, they are not mercenaries. So these mentors would wear Afghan uniforms, would grow beards. It takes away the irritant of a foreign force that is there, whether there's a U.S. or any other NATO army that's there in the country.
Also, let me ask you, what is the climate on Capitol Hill towards your proposal?
Surprisingly not that negative. I mean, there are some people that are default that will always just spend more on the Pentagon, whatever the Pentagon asks for. But for I'd say the rational members of Congress that realize that the current trajectory is not working, they're quite open to a change. And I've talked to members right, left, and center on this. Now, of course, the left, anything that Donald Trump comes up with, they will find reason to attack it. But I think for the rational taxpayer and for the Americans whose sons and daughters are fighting or could be sent to Afghanistan, they realize the error of the current trajectory and want to change it.
Mike?
I just think that the time has come to admit that we've lost that war, that it was ill thought of, ill conducted, and ignorant of the problem we were getting into. But now, for me, the golden side of this is to get out and let it fall. Let the Taliban be in Kabul. Let IS be in Kabul. Let them both be in Kabul. Because they're going to fight the Chinese when the Chinese try to run their magic road and railroad and highway through Central Asia to Turkey on this, they call it One Road, One Belt project. The Chinese can deploy forces there and lose. The Russians are going to have to go in there now because the IS and the Taliban are growing increasingly strong in the north. We might have a situation where the Chinese and the Russians would contain themselves. We wouldn't even have to do it. We haven't done our best in Afghanistan. We've done, we've had a terrible war plan and we've followed it. And the only problem is that we should have known beforehand. But I don't see any point in putting another nickel into that country.
Well, here's the thing. The original war plan was not the Pentagon's war plan. It was really led by the CIA, and it was a punitive raid. The Taliban were largely decimated in a few months by 100 CIA officers, a couple of hundred special forces, backed by U.S. air power, and the Taliban really turned tail. But when we allowed, when all the conventional generals and the conventional U.S. Army showed up, everything, when the nation-building exercise began, all progress really stopped. If you put unrelenting pressure on the Taliban, they will fold. They are not scaled and built to go toe-to-toe with forces that are aggressively pursuing them every day. But right now, or really for the last many years, you've had basically fortified compound war, where the U.S. forces are holed up in large mega compounds, and it's very difficult and very obvious whenever they leave the base. And we have the finest U.S. military in the world. If they could only get the enemy to fight them the way they want to fight.
Yeah, well, that's
the problem.
That is exactly correct. If they go with your plan and your plan works 100%, then what? Are we smart enough to then get out and let the Afghans rule themselves as they've ruled themselves for 2 millennia? Or do we turn the switch and start the democracy mongering again?
No, this is certainly not to do a nation-building exercise. This is to deny terror sanctuary and then leave.
Time now, 7:23 on the John Fredericks Show. You're on with Erik Prince, former CEO of Blackwater, Dr. Michael Scheuer and Colonel Mike. Go ahead, Eric.
Like I said, the goal is to deny terror sanctuary and leave. We've spent a lot of blood and treasure there. And the idea to try to deny sanctuary for terrorists in Syria or Iraq, and to try to take that away, the global rally cry for every jihadi, whether it's a guy that wants to drive a bus into tourists in Spain or France or the United States or wherever, you just don't want to grant the jihadis that kind of actual or moral victory anywhere.
Mike, you got the last minute.
Yeah, I think that victory, there is no victory there, sir. That we are getting attacked, and especially the Europeans are getting attacked because they don't want to defend themselves. I think you're exactly right that the Taliban and the jihadis are not 10 foot tall. The problem is that we're 3 feet tall, and the Europeans are about a foot tall in terms of knowing how, and more than that, wanting to defend themselves.
Eric, the last word.
Look, I see why people would want to just pull out of Afghanistan. I don't disagree with a lot of those points. However, putting a tourniquet on the longest wound in American history is better than letting it just bleed out. And that's been my goal. There's a big meeting of the National Security Cabinet up at Camp David today. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Eric Prince.
Nice to talk to you, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
You bet, guys. Bye.